This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we look at the year ahead. I'm joined by some of the Monocle team to preview stories from our special New Year's magazine, The Forecast. We'll talk the future of French furniture and training the next generation of craftspeople, plus the art of sail making. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. To kick off today's show, I'm joined in the studio by Grace Charlton, and to kick off our first week back at work for 2025. We've both been on holiday in Australia, separate parts of the country. What's on your mind and your agenda for the year ahead?
It's such a tough one because I've been thinking about this and I love a new start to the year, but it does feel like time is a construct. Bear with me.
Wow.
And I'm worried my answer is going to be a little bit boring, but just a continuation of what we've already seen and a reinforcement of material understanding and craft and, you know, all that stuff we go on and on about at Monocle. But I hope just to see more of that in 2025.
But I think that's quite fascinating. I mean, these are storylines we've kind of been charting for a number of years, particularly the material thing. It's something I've become obsessed with because I seem to talk about it constantly on this show. But I think what makes it so fascinating is true innovation is taking place in that sector. I remember a few years ago, if you made something out of mycelium, it usually looked like it was genuinely just pulled out of the earth straight from the mushroom farm. I think now we're seeing things where they're a little bit more refined. You jump across to fashion, it's like Hermes is now making products with mycelium that look sleek and beautiful and wonderful and something that you actually want to hold on to. So I think good storylines to continue to chart. This show is about forecasting or previewing the forecast. Either way works, which is our annual publication that's, I guess, about looking towards the future. We've always nailed it, I must say, except for 2020. We got that one slightly wrong. But for the most part, I feel like we're pretty good on picking up trends. Tell us what you reported on and I guess how that relates to the future of design.
I went to a factory in Burgundy, which is a delightful area of the world, to meet the entrepreneurs who have taken over Tolix, which is a French heritage brand. They specialise in steel chairs. Another theme that we've talked about a lot on this show, and I'm sure we will continue to in 2025 and beyond, is the fashion world bleeding into the design world. So they've got backgrounds in Balmain and Anya Hinmarch and Carven, and they've taken over this company and made it quite cool.
How? Tell us what
because
I could use some tips, I feel.
It's very sleek. We're really in the age of aluminium and metal furniture, it seems. And I think they're just doing a really good job at preserving the craft and making sure that it's being passed down the generations, but also making it cool and sort of marketing it well. Maybe that's something we don't talk about enough in this show, but like marketing is really important and how a brand presents itself matters. So I think they're doing a good job at sort of telling that story in an appealing way.
And are these sort of experiences they're bringing from fashion? Because I guess that's what I'm curious about. Fashion operates at a pace maybe that design isn't used to. It's operating with budgets that design isn't used to. How does, I guess, that skill set and that context then get reapplied to design?
I think it's a lot of art direction. Campaigns are amazing. Their Instagram, making sure they're showing up at the right fairs. They participated in Matter and Shape, which is this new design salon, which does blend a lot of fashion and design in terms of the crowd that it attracts. I think that's what they're doing.
Do you expect to see more of this? Or is your hope maybe to see more of this?
Will we see more of it? I'm sure. I'm wondering if we'll reach a saturation point and it will all dissolve quickly. Fashion can be a little bit fickle as a field.
What's the best part? You cover a lot of fashion, I don't. What are some of the strong points of covering fashion that you really enjoy that you maybe would like to see translated? And then what can we leave behind?
I think I like the sort of conceptual storytelling in fashion that design can lack because it's like, it's a chair, you sit on it, it's comfortable. I think I like that sort of storytelling skill that fashion people have.
And I think as well, for consumers, the appeal of that is we all want, I guess, things in our home, objects in our home that we want to feel a connection to. I think that if you go back to something maybe nostalgic, it's like I've got my grandfather's armchair and that's super, super important and super, super special for me. But equally, if you're buying something new, you also maybe want a little bit of a story behind it. You want a little bit of that conceptual storytelling that you can then latch onto and hang on to. So I think that's a beautiful direction to be heading in.
What are you feeling for 2025? What have you been forecasting?
There's a really nice story on Post-it notes and I guess how designers use them to inform their creative process. And it was kind of this quirky idea that actually came from Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck. We were looking at the redesign of our website. We had a workshop with a web designer and it's funny, you're working in this digital field and he's doing everything on Post-its, storyboarding, telling stories using Post-its and very tactile, non-techie, low-techie sort of things. And we started to investigate how other designers might actually use the humble Post-it note to inform their process. And I think the one that really jumped out at me, these two Boston-based designers, Jenny and Anne are French, they're architects and they're doing very kind of community-led design work, and how they kind of document and process and work with the community. A lot of it is driven by the use of Post-it notes. So, for instance, to ensure when you're designing a space for 100 people and you ensure that there's, I guess, a little bit of consensus on the design details, the team put together these colour-coded sticky note systems. So it's green if you agree, yellow for a potential point of conflict, and then pink if you really hated the idea. It was this way of maybe stripping a little bit of emotion out of the group design process, and then, I guess, allowing people to feel confident to say, hey, I've got an objection to this, or I think this is really strong, which I think was beautiful. And sometimes those sorts of things can get lost in online forms, or you're not having those moments of interaction that you get if you're all in the room and potentially are working with something like a simple pen and paper. There's probably also something to be said about the broader creative process and that kind of intersection between technology and creativity, perhaps. There's a beauty to seeing a product drawn on the back of a napkin. There's something amazing about going into a designer's studios and seeing their process evolve on layer on layer on layer and layer of trace paper. I wonder, are you a person that kind of writes and maps your stories out by hand?
Yeah, 100%. I think I need to do it to strip back all the noise, because on my laptop, it's just or my phone, it's just always pinging with notifications, and I find it hard to really sit down and concentrate. If I'm, especially when you're trying to generate creativity and original ideas and all you have to do is sort of bat away emails. Maybe I'll start doing more Post-its.
Mapping your stories with the sticky note. There's also something about, the free hand and its connection to your mind. You're very constrained. I'm looking at my computer now. You've got like a 10 by 20 centimetre area, and that's really all you're working in. But the reality is if you're drawing and working with your hand, you can kind of take it anywhere. I think that's a nice point to end.
Lovely. Thanks, Nick.
We'll be right back after this.
Tune in to Monocle on Culture, where we grill our panel of critics to get the inside line on the best in the world of film, music, art, literature and more.
It's just got this synth section that kind of makes you want to swing through the saloon doors straight to the dance floor.
With industry insiders and the odd bit of reportage too, it's bound to keep the most discerning of culture vultures very well fed.
Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That is a song that is absolutely going to make you want to put on a pair of tight jeans and go boot scooting, even if it's just in your front room.
Monocle on Culture, premiering Mondays at 2000 London time and available thereafter wherever you get your podcasts.
In the age of sail, the art of sail-making was a prized talent, and ships even employed skilled sailsmakers on their crew. But in the modern era, industrial factories serving the yachting world largely took over this ancient craft. However, a few traditional sailmakers still stitch by hand to serve the world's remaining tall ships. Monocle's Seattle correspondent, Gregory Scruggs, travelled to a sail-making loft in Washington state, where this craft tradition thrives. There, he met a second-generation sailmaker.
Saltwater is my constant companion as I make the journey to a rural outpost on Puget Sound near the small city of Port Townsend. In this hub for traditional maritime crafts, there are 4 sailmaking operations in the vicinity, perhaps the largest such concentration in North America. I turn onto an unpaved drive and ascend a rickety set of steps to a second-floor loft, where bolts of cloth hang from the ceiling. Inside, one of the continent's most sought-after sailmakers has a work in progress spread out before her, while an assistant and an apprentice hammer and stitch in the background.
My name is Naja Chimenti, and I run the family business Force 10 Sailmaking and Rigging. We are traditional sailmakers and riggers for tall ships. And we have a loft here on Marrowstone Island. So this sail is the gaff foresail for the schooner Californian, which belongs to the San Diego Maritime Museum. And I am currently sewing in the corner piece for the throat, which is the upper forward corner of the sail. And I am hand stitching this fitting in to the canvas, which is quickly becoming a lost art. Most modern sailmakers would put this fitting in place with a few pieces of webbing sewn in on the sewing machine. And, it would hold so long as the stitching held, but corners tend to be high chafe areas, and I have definitely seen corners where all the stitching was worn away on one side of the webbing, and I'm just shocked that those fittings hadn't pulled out of the sail yet.
So doing it by hand, you're able to buttress it, bolster it, somehow give it more strength than a sewing machine potentially could?
Yeah, so I'm currently stitching around the fitting itself, but I will also be adding a series of anchor eyelets, satellite eyelets that go out beyond this into the body of the sail, and then affixing those to this fitting with a series of lashings. And all of that makes this corner very integral to the sail. So rather than just being a piece of webbing that relies only on one set of stitching that is exposed and vulnerable, this is going to be a whole sort of community of fittings that holds together this corner. And then the corner itself is going to get covered with a piece of leather that protects it from chafe.
Can you tell me a bit about some of the tools of the trade that are perhaps unique to sailmaking versus other types of sewing, stitching crafts?
There's a basic set of tools that are used across, the heavy sewing industry. You've got your industrial sewing machines, you've got your heavy-duty shears and such. Somewhat more unique to sailmaking, and especially like traditional sailmaking, you have your awls, you have your punches, and you have your weighted rawhide mallets. And then very unique to traditional sailmaking, where there's still handwork being done, and probably the most iconic sailmaker's tool is the sailmaker's palm, which is it's a rawhide and leather construction that fits around the hand with a thumb hole, and then it has a metal thimble that's inset to the rawhide, which holds the eye of the needle, so that you can push the needle through with the strength of your entire arm and not just using your fingers.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want it balanced.
All right.
Make sense?
Yeah. Does that look pretty close to what
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now don't move it. That's the hard part, is sketching it without moving it. I don't know if you saw how much line is with.
As I spend the morning watching Naja and her team at work, I admire the collection of photographs and newspaper clippings that decorate the walls. Many feature the Tole Moor, a 48-meter schooner launched in 1988. Naja's parents, Wayne and Nicole Chimenti, were part of a small team that built the rigging and sails. The couple joined the inaugural journey to the South Pacific, where the Tole Moor provided healthcare services in the Marshall Islands and later plied the waters around Hawaii. Until the Tole Moor was sold to a Caribbean tour operator in 2014, it was the largest tall ship on the west coast. The Chimentis, who had fallen in love while crewing sailboats across the Atlantic and the Pacific, had picked up the craft from Australian master sailmaker George McNeill, himself descended from a long line of sailmakers dating to the First Fleet, who left England for the Southern Hemisphere in 1787. As the Chimentis sought to settle down, relatively speaking, from their itinerant life on the seas, they found a parcel of land on Marrowstone Island to hang out their shingle as sailmakers. Working on the Tole Moor kick-started their reputation, and Force 10 sailmaking was born. As, for that matter, was Naja, who grew up in the family business, but hardly as a landlubber. The loft is also dotted with photos of a young Naja aboard the Tole Moor, where Wayne Chimenti served as part-time captain with his wife and baby in tow. By the time Naja was 4, the family returned to Marrowstone Island, content to sail tall ships around Puget Sound, like the estuary's resident specimen, the Adventurous, docked just a few miles away, and run the family business. Naja was reunited with the Tole Moor at age 12 as a mate, when her father captained the ship once again to orient a new crew in California's Catalina Islands, cementing a lifelong relationship with tall ships.
As traditional sailmaking has receded in need, certainly from the heyday of the Age of Sail, but nevertheless, vessels, especially the tall ship scene, if you will, still has a need for these sails. How does Force 10 fit into this more cottage industry? What is the scale of your clientele? I mean, how many options are there? And if you're one of the last few standing, does that provide a steady source of clients to keep this craft going here and allow you to not just make a livelihood, but even teach additional sailmakers as we have in the loft today?
Yeah. Along with that big historical shift in the purpose of sail, tall ships as an entity, they faded from the scene very dramatically after that boom of the age of sail, and they were fading into entirely obscurity. And then they got discovered probably around the 50s and 70s as a great platform for education. And that is their primary purpose these days. So you have tall ships that are run by various navies. Most navies have a tall ship. In the U.S., our Navy has one that never leaves the dock. But our Coast Guard has one that sails on a regular basis all over the place, the Eagle. And other than that, we have educational tall ships all up and down both the east and western seaboard, and even some down in the Gulf. And some of them are associated with museums that go out and do day sails. Some of them are associated with organizations that do environmental awareness education. So we have the Schooner Adventurous here in the Puget Sound, the Clearwater over in the Hudson River, and various boats like that. And then there's another cadre of tall ships, mostly schooners and sloops, that do just sort of your standard day sail, tourism, booze cruise deal. But they're all creating awareness of a traditional way of life, a way of taking advantage of the wind and of showcasing some of these traditional arts as well.
From Monocle, on Marrowstone Island, I'm Gregory Scruggs.
The Menu, bringing you Monocle's recipe for the best in drinking and dining. We make entertaining a doddle.
It's incredibly easy to make.
With expert opinions.
You can use fish fillets, which you grill in the oven or pan fry.
A bit of seasoning.
Lots of lime, a lot of cracked pepper, and a bit of good olive oil.
And plenty of spice.
And then you cook it in caraway and 7 spice.
As well as something sweet.
Then you take a big pot of mascarpone and spoon it into your egg yolk.
And maybe even a little bit nuts.
You take it out, you top it with some pine nuts, and you're good to go.
It's a recipe that's guaranteed to impress.
It's slightly controversial, but it's the one thing that has surprised the most people when they eat it.
Premiering live every Friday at 2000 London time, midday in Los Angeles, or downloadable wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm now joined in the studio by Monocle researcher Lucrezia Motta, a regular contributor to Monocle on Design. Lovely to have you in here.
Happy to be here, as always.
You have been very busy for the forecast. We worked together. I feel like I was sending you left, right and centre, but you're also picking up stories elsewhere. Tell us a little bit about what your experience was reporting for the forecast. Why was this kind of an important thing to be involved in?
It was an incredible experience, and I think it really made me excited for 2025 in terms of people to look out for. We're going to be seeing just some amazing things coming out.
They're about people to look out for. I know there's a young designer that was on your radar that you went and met. Tell us a little bit about this story.
So I was able to meet, his name is Edgar Jaillet. He's a French designer. He's super young. He has 2 studios. He has one in Paris, one in Venice. So amazing for my end. I think I really connected with it immediately.
As somebody that has Italian and French roots, this is sort of like the dream commission.
And so obviously you can imagine the interview when both a big mix of French and Italian. It was amazing. He's an alumni of the École Camondo in Paris.
Which is an amazing, amazing design school.
His philosophy is really a sort of a love letter to 18th century French furniture making, but it's not frozen in time. It's modern, it's sleek, and it's really about bringing back arts and craftsmanship that we don't see into modern furnitures and how to really bring it in modern interiors. And it was incredible to talk about the relationship he's built with craftsmen in Venice, who are sometimes the only ones who still know how to do certain very specific skills and almost only work in renovations because they're the only ones who know how to do it, and how he decided to bring that in modern furniture. When you see his line, it has an almost Napoleonic feel to it. You have these day beds, which I personally feel we should be bringing in 2025.
Partial to a daily nap, I think.
So it's these very sleek lines with with these very nice little details. He also brought in a friend of his, who's also a friend of Monocle. She's a textile designer, Chiara Stella Catana, to do these cotton panelings on the furniture. So it's this very sleek, very minimalist furniture, but it looks absolutely incredible and it's just divine to look at.
Also, what's fascinating is, and I think back to some of our stories from 2024, we featured Richard England a few times, both in the magazine and on radio, but he was talking about the fact that we have a lot to learn, but equally even more to remember. And I think that's quite important. There's something to be said about not looking at the past for nostalgia's sake, but looking at the past for lessons that we might have forgotten. And it feels like there's a little bit of that energy here, remembering maybe the way we used to make things, the care, the detail, the craft in the 18th century. And it sounds like Edgar's bringing that to the fore in the 21st.
A big discussion I've always had with specifically Italian and French designers, with countries that have such a heavy and impressive design history. I think the discussion can sometimes go either it's too much in the past or too much about resting on our laurels or trying to be in complete contrast with it and really breaking from the path. And I really think there is a sweet spot to be had in the middle. And it absolutely represents that.
I think that's magnificent. Let's talk a little bit more about craft. I know a story we worked on together involved you going and potentially picking up some apprenticeships in craft across Europe. I mean, maybe let's start with Ligné Rosé, who I know we've got a little bit. You interviewed them. I think we might have some of the audio.
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, it's a lot more about atmosphere because it is in French. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Bonjour.
But I think it really shows the atmosphere of that incredible factory.
I mean, and tell us a little bit about the factory. It's not just a factory.
So the family has been settled in Briord, which is just a couple hours away from Lyon in southwest France. And for generations, you can really tell because everyone knows them. And they have this amazing complex in the city overlooking the mountains. And when I spoke with current CEO Olivier Rosé, their project is about renovating that complex. So they're rebuilding and renovating the original factories, making these huge changes to accommodate a new factory showroom with a lot of different pieces, a bit of a museum, and most importantly, a dedicated upholstery school. Ligné Rosé is in this very particular spot in the industry where they're between luxury and industrial making. They need artisans who know how have a specific talents and who are capable of producing a lot because they're big producers, but to make it with a specific way of doing things. Coming in and seeing these young people working on sewing the buttons on those Togo couches, it was incredible. And it is a very specific craft. And they decided, well, there's no one really in France who teaches that outside, so let's just bring it in ourselves.
And they need it for their own business. And I think what's also fascinating about this, I mean, I've spoken to Olivier a few times, co-CEO of Ligné Rosé. You know, he talks a little bit about they've been in Briord for generations, but equally they're craftspeople as well. So there is also something about making sure that this legacy, these families that have this tradition of making protected and enhanced, and, you know, people can grow their skill set. And I think that's what makes this so magnificent. There's a family story, there's a community story, and it's really, you know, this business that's, sure, it's set up this school to help it continue to make amazing products, but it's also a little bit about giving back to the local community and this tradition of making that has been there for generations. I want to ask about another school that you went to. It's a little bit of a change of gear. Tell us a little bit about the people learning how to be amazing jewelers for Buccellati.
It's in a school in Milan. The Scuola Orafa Ambrosiana. It was founded by Luca Solari in the 90s, and it is an independent school for goldsmithing. When I spoke to Luca, he talked about the fact that this was his hobby. He had no previous knowledge in it, and he doesn't come from a family that's in this industry, but he had a passion, and he saw that there wasn't a big gap in the market. Traditionally in Italy, goldsmithing is a family craft, and it is harder to get into if you're not already born into it. He decided to create a school that would allow people to get into this incredible craft by themselves. Over the years, he's developed an incredible team of teachers and students, and just an incredible community in the heart of Milan, which obviously has attracted a lot of amazing Italian jewelers who needed that expertise within the city, including a personal favorite of mine, Buccellati, who had collaborated a lot with the school over the past in a very more informal manner, but they loved the philosophy of the school so much they decided to create their own path of goldsmithing for students.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about this. It's a school running an academic institution, particularly an independent one, is incredibly difficult. So then to have somebody like Buccellati identify that, hey, this school's doing it right, this school is doing it really well, and actually it serves us to support them. So they're coming in and, I guess, helping run and fund their own programs, which I think is really, really special. I've kind of got to ask, Was there a trade school that you think you'd want to go to?
I have to say, I think I was absolutely charmed by the Scuola Orfa when I went there. It was such a warm and welcoming atmosphere. You came in and you had all these students just working on their projects with teachers individually going from one student to another, explaining, and then kind of look over the student's shoulder and it's just an incredible piece of jewelry that they're casually holding in their hands and being like, no, actually, this little piece isn't totally perfect. And my mind was like, what do you mean it's not perfect? It's beautiful. Can I please have it?
Well, we'll see if maybe we can get you some cast-offs from the school and maybe a secondment for a few weeks at Buccellati. Lucrezia Motta, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Finally on today's show, we're looking at the world of artificial limbs. Thanks to major advances in AI and robotics, scientists and manufacturers can now offer wearers of bionic limbs devices that redefine what it means to use a prosthetic. For more on these developments, it's over to Monocle researcher Julia Lassica.
Back on their feet. While high-tech prosthetics are trickling into the market, the World Health Organization estimates that, as a result of the lack of access to high-quality healthcare across the globe, only 1 in 10 people who need a prosthesis have access to even basic assistive products. Swiss-Kenyan venture Circle is working to address this with a low-cost prosthetic leg that was launched last year.
Most people who need prosthetics either don't have access to it or can't afford it,
says co-founder Simon Oshwald.
There is a huge gap between provision and demand that we're working to fill.
Oshwald and Circle co-founder Fabian Engel originally developed the prototype as their bachelor's thesis in industrial design. The leg is modular, size customizable, and can be assembled locally in Nairobi. It is sold as part of a holistic package that includes orthopedic training for fitting sockets and starts at as little as $350, a fraction of the prices for state-of-the-art prostheses such as Otterbox Genium X4, which can run into 6 figures. After a year in business, Circle has business-to-business clients in East and West Africa and has just expanded to Latin America.
When you lose a leg, the main barrier is that you are seen as disabled and unable to provide for the community,
says Oshwald.
We are trying to shift that perspective.
My thanks to Julia Lassica. For more on advances in prosthetic design from the US to the Ukraine, pick up a copy of Monocle magazine's new annual, The Forecast. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well, and The Forecast, which is what we've been talking about today. It's our annual look ahead to the year ahead. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.